Bond Oversight Committee to meet the auditors for the Pasadena City College District. And we, as we discussed at the last meeting, had the question about whether we had a voice in their being the auditor for this committee, and were told about their qualifications and deep experience. And they are prepared to talk about their qualifications and background at this meeting, as well as the performance audit and what they will be doing that will address the job that we have on this committee, which is to see that what the spending that is done is reported to us appropriately, and that it matches what it says in the bond issue, whether we like what the bond issue said or not, and all that. So we think we understand our chart. But let's start off and have a roll call. We know we don't have a quorum, but we can do that anyway.
Okay, Dr. Pound.
Here.
Alan.
Present.
Brandon.
Here.
Brent. Justin.
Present.
Kevin. Lawrence.
Here.
Mary. Robin Navarro. Ron. Sue Choi. Tony.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have enough members of the committee.
You can say that no matter who should.
And we have nobody here asking to make a public comment, and for those online, do they have an opportunity to ask to speak, I guess?
Not online, they need to submit those
But
things.
they need to have submitted it beforehand, or can they
That's
do that
correct.
now? No, okay. So then we're ready to move forward, and we have representatives here from I-Bailey. They are Alicia Herrera, principal here, and Anna Cordelia. Thank you for coming, and welcome.
Thanks for having us. So we're going to give you guys a quick overview of our firm, who we are, and we're going to talk a little bit about what our bond audit will entail, and then we'll be happy to take any questions that the committee has as well. So I'm Alicia Herrera. I'm going to be the engagement partner this year. I've taken over all of the PCC audits from our previous partner, Rick Alonso. He had to rotate off based on state requirements. And so I will be the partner coming on this year. I've worked in community colleges and K-12 audits in California for the past 13 years. That's pretty much all I've done in my time in public accounting. And I work with a lot of colleges here in Los Angeles and Orange County, Mount Stack, Coast, Santa Monica, Citrus. So this is the area I like to work in as well. So, and I will let Anna introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Anna. So I've been with the firm for just over 5 years. I've also spent my entire career with the firm doing community college audits, do a couple of school districts here and there as well, and some nonprofits. It's actually going to be my first year overseeing the Pasadena audit, but I'm very familiar with colleges. I oversee South Orange Community College District. I work with Mount Stack College, Community College, so really familiar with community colleges.
So a little bit about our firm. We are a national firm. We're top 25. We're usually around 17 to 15, give or take a number here or there. We're really, really proud to have moved across the Mississippi River this year. We have new offices in Ohio and South Carolina. So in the 100 plus years we've been in business, we've always been west of the Mississippi. So we're going the opposite of Manifest Destiny here. We're going east. So we're really, really excited about that. But here in California, we've been practicing for quite a long time in the educational space. Our previous firm, if anybody's worked with other governments locally, was Veteran Trained Day, VTD. And so that's really where our expertise working with California educational entities comes from. And that's what we're really proud of. So one of the things that we can offer that we feel other firms cannot is we have a team dedicated to working on community colleges in California. So we have 23 auditors. That's pretty much all that they do. So we have a lot of expertise. We provide a lot of training. And we have a lot of good contacts out in the community with the chancellor's office, with local county offices of education, with other colleges, to kind of see what's out in the industry and what people are doing. So something that we've built over the past about 40, 50 years or so that we're really proud of. Currently, the team that we have, our 23 auditors, we provide audit services to 30 of the 72 community college districts. And then of those, we did 24 of the district's bonds. Many of the districts don't have bonds anymore. They finished spending them or maybe are in between bond measures. But we're currently doing 24 of those. And I have a nice list here in case you're interested in who some of our other clients are. We do bond programs of all sizes, excuse me. So we have really large ones like Mount Sac and Santa Monica where we're spending close to $100 million a year, and we have very small ones that are doing one project at a time and maybe closer to that $6 million a year mark. So we've seen a lot of different things over the years with Prop 39 audits. Luckily, not much has changed with the Prop 39 audits from a compliance standpoint and what we put out, but the industry is always changing and the nature of construction is always changing, and so just because of the amount that we do, we're able to see a lot of what's going on out there, kind of keep up with the current trends. Colleges are not the only ones that get these audits, though. We also do them for our K-12 school districts. We do probably close to 250 to 300 K-12 school districts within our California practice. Many of those have multiple bonds, so this is something we do a lot, and we're pretty good at. Let's talk about.
Could I just stop?
Yeah,
So,
of course.
any questions at this point? And so we just speak up if you have one. I do have a question at this point. Under, in my background, our auditors had to be essentially, I'll just use the word accredited for the Defense Contract Audit Agency or for the National Institutes of Health. Our auditors had to be accredited and pass a certification. And I understood that there's something like this that goes on because your audit is accepted not just by our trustees at PCC and perhaps by this committee, but by the state of California as an audit in lieu of their coming in and doing the audit, because otherwise the federal government would come in and do the audit. And so what standards do you have other than the generally accepted accounting practices and all those? What rules do you follow, and who accredits you? Because I think I understood from our financial people here before that you undergo some certifications.
Sure. So to practice here in California and to do these types of audits, we have to be a peer-reviewed firm. So every 2 years we get a peer review, which means we get audited by other auditors. They come in and they look at our quality control procedures, our audit products, our work products, and we receive essentially an audit opinion on whether or not our firm is conforming to professional standards. A copy of our peer review are public. We provide them to the district every time we sign a contract with them. I'm happy to provide one for the committee's review as well. In addition to that, to practice within the governmental space as a whole, we have to follow what's called the Yellow Book standards. So these are government auditing standards. They are more stringent than your traditional AICPA standards that you would do for like a for-profit entity. Really where the emphasis is on this is that we are independent of our clients. There are more stringent independence requirements. In addition, all of our staff that work on any governmental engagement have to have additional continuing professional education. So we have to have 80 hours of government-specific professional education every 2 years in order to practice on governmental entities. So those are some of the additional certifications or qualifications that we have to have in order to be able to issue our audit opinions. And you're correct, we submit our report to quite a long list of agencies actually on the district's behalf. It goes to the Chancellor's Office, the State Controller's Office, the LA County Office of Education, and the accrediting agencies as well.
So sometimes there's an advisory letter that comes to management, and sometimes to a board. You may get a clean audit opinion, but you also may get a management letter that suggests improvements that you can make that when you look at it, The quality of that letter usually seems to me like it shows you whether they're really paying attention and whether the auditors doing the job really have deep experience in it, and we're not just getting trainees or something working on the audit. So when you have the peer review, do you get letters like that with recommendations to make improvements, and what do you, or do you always get an A and say everything you do is fine?
Yeah, so the peer reviews are similar to the audit. You kind of either get a clean opinion or you don't get a clean opinion. We do get comments back. Those are not included in the peer review
Right.
themselves, but we do get them, and typically what we'll do is we'll institute new policies to implement them, because we get peer reviewed every 2 years, so they will check for them when they come back, whether we have the same firm doing our peer review or not.
And then just how do you avoid the problems of familiarity? You have many, it looks like, including with PCC, long-term clients. So you have, you know the people. Usually, I think you can trust that all of those are good, but there's always a suspicion among people that there's an over-familiar relationship, and it's not really arm's length testing of things.
Yep. So, governmental agencies within California have a mandatory audit partner rotation, so not audit firm, but the partner that signs the audit report. That's the one that's going to directly oversee the engagement. You have to have a new audit partner every 6 years. So I mentioned that Pasadena did have a previous audit partner, Rick Alonzo. He had been here for 6 years, and so now he has to rotate to another audit partner, so and that's me. What we do as well, what you'll see sometimes in the industry is people they'll do their 6 years, they'll give it to another partner for 1 year, and then they'll take it back. We don't do that. We have actually 4 different partners within our practice that work with community colleges enough to do the engagements, and so we really believe that all of our partners provide excellent service, and so we want to get that familiarity away. So we do try and go this full 6 years and rotate once again to probably a new partner. So.
Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Okay, proceed. Thank you.
No problem. Want to talk a little bit about what the audit's going to entail?
Sure. So as you had mentioned, we're going to do a financial audit as well as a performance audit. So for the financial audit, what we're going to do is we'll come in at the end of the year. I think we have you guys scheduled for September this year. So we'll come in, we'll get a trial balance along with any of the underlying details to those balances. And then from there, we're going to audit those balances to make sure that we can have reasonable assurance that there's no material misstatements within the financial statements. So during the planning phase of the audit, typically we'll assess risk and kind of take a look at different factors, what type of internal controls the district has, just to kind of start planning our audit procedures on what procedures we'll perform to basically obtain that reasonable assurance. In addition, for Prop 39 audits, we perform the performance audit, which is the fun side of things, where basically we're going to take a look at the expenditures. So we'll plan our procedures and we'll make sample selections and basically provide that listing to the district based off the ledger details, and they'll pull the support for us. So then from there, we're going to take a look at any controls over the expenditures, as well as making sure that they are within state regulations, along with that they're in accordance with the approved ballot measure. So that's what our performance audit is going to be. And then from there, we'll base our opinions off of the procedures we've performed.
Yeah. And so with the performance audit, there's basically 2 main things. We look at all of the expenditures that go out and make sure that they're in accordance with the state regulations and the ballot language. But in addition to that, we also do specific procedures if there's any payroll paid out of the bond fund. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. It just depends. We look to see if there is any out there. We do kind of a completeness check. And then we look at the salary charged to the bond to ensure that they are appropriate, that they're not for administrative or general use of the district, that they are specifically tied to the construction. So that's a separate area that we always look at. One of the benefits of doing both the bond and the district audit is you get a wider scope of what we're looking at. So we do these audits in conjunction with one another. Which means that when we're doing our risk assessment over the district and the various areas we look at there, we have a better idea of any control deficiencies or process issues out there that could affect the bond if we were only looking at the bond fund, if that makes sense. So we get a wider array of processes that we get to look at within the district and be able to identify if any of those deficiencies could affect the bond, even if maybe they didn't that year, they could in the future. So that's one of the benefits, I think, when you have an auditor do both. Every once in a while, we have a client that we only do the bond or we only do the district and they have separate auditors. I don't think it's necessarily efficient, and I do think that you get a better idea of the control environment of the district as a whole when you do everything. So that's kind of a little bit additional information on that. Once we complete our audit, we're going to issue our reports, and then we provide the final reports to the committee. We will most likely come back and present it, I'm thinking, for you guys. So we'll go over the report in detail, we'll talk about what we did, we'll take all of your questions. This committee receives our report, this committee and the district governing board, let me rephrase that, receive our report, because remember, we're independent auditors, so we can't have any kind of approval process from the district when we issue our report. We have to be independent on that. So you'll receive a copy of the report, and then with that information, this committee is usually charged with incorporating the information about our audit in your guys' annual report to the community. So that's how our audit plays in to that process. And I think that's all we have, so I'd be more than happy to go over any questions that you guys have about the audit in general or our firm or anything you got. Yes?
So this is my first rodeo here, and I'm just wondering, when you explain that part of what you do is you confirm that the expenditures are consistent with state and bond requirements, state law and bond requirements, what are you doing exactly to make sure that they do conform with these requirements? What are you looking at? How deep of a dive are you taking? Are you interviewing people? Just trying to get a sense of what's involved.
Yeah. So we will interview people. We'll ask about their processes, how they work with the bond monies, all of the processes behind the bidding, the purchasing, procurement, and then the processing of the bond invoices. That's part of our risk assessment. So once we do that, we will analyze if we see any deficiencies, and that's where we'll target our testing. But after that, we will start pulling our samples. We pull our samples in accordance with our professional standards, but we also try and get a wide array of different projects that the college is working on so that we can kind of see a little bit of every area. And then the fun part for the college, they get to start pulling all of the backup for us. So we'll start pulling all of the invoices, and construction invoices are very thick, unfortunately. We will ask for the bid documentation for the projects, the purchase documentation. If it didn't go through a bid for whatever reason, it was a purchase order, we'll look at all of that information. And then from that, we start going through the invoices. We make sure that it's recorded correctly, it's put against the right project, that the project itself and then the underlying costs meet the ballot language, so that not just that it was for a specific project, but the actual activity would be allowable. And then in terms of the state requirements, those are generally a little bit more straightforward. That's basically saying we can't do anything that's should be the responsibility of the general fund, or anything that would support more of an administrative purpose rather than the purpose of the bond.
Great, thank you.
Is that process that you just described outlined in the contract with the district?
Yes, so we issue an engagement letter. It talks about the different steps that we're going to, it actually lists out in bullet points the steps that we're going to take for this audit, because the performance audit is considered what's called agreed upon procedures. So we establish the actual procedures that we're going to do, and that's all outlined in our engagement letter.
And that includes the steps that are involved in complying with Prop 39.
Yes.
So can you provide a copy of that
Sure.
process to the members? Because I think we've had a lot of questions about what goes on. And so if we could maybe, if the rest of you would like to have that, I think we could have that posted as a reference document. Could we do that? So we can refer people to, because there have been a lot of questions about how thorough and independent investigation you do, and it seems to me that some of the things that have arisen before, like worries that we were going to be charging the bond for general administrative salaries that in some way that was inappropriate and not related, which you've addressed, so I think it would be nice if we do that.
Yep. The good thing about that too is our engagement letter sets out all of our procedures and then they're mirrored in our report. So we'll basically list them out again and list the results of what we did when we come back with our final report at the end of the year.
Can you tell us too what you think the principal value added by this committee is, this bond oversight committee?
So I can tell you from a legal standpoint, and I've actually had other committees that have brought in bond counsel to do presentations on kind of updates on any changes in legislation related to the committee's role, what the different laws are, where the enabling legislation is. So I would also recommend that too, because a lot of this goes back into Ed Code and California law, which I always remind people we're CPAs, so when you ask me for my legal advice, you get what you pay for. But this committee is really provides oversight. Your role is to ask questions, to put out the annual report, to receive our audit, go through it, and incorporate that in your annual report, and to meet regularly and discuss the projects and ongoing bond-related items for the district. But again, I would recommend if you guys want to get into a deeper dive, that might be something that bond counsel would be able to provide you in a lot better detail than I can.
Well, through our esteemed Vice President, could we get a list of the recommendations that she has that you can kind of go through and then pass on as you see appropriate?
So you want the engagement letter, which we can provide
Right,
and get
and
posted.
then when she was talking about bond counsel and the
So
other
our bond
questions.
counsel was at the very first meeting, so she
Right,
did
so
that
we
presentation.
heard that.
Yes, so if we would want to invite her back to see if there are any changes in legislation or things like that, we certainly can do that.
In terms of, I don't know how much you know about this, the practice of this committee, have you seen the reports that we get on at our meetings?
We do read the board minutes, so as part of our audit, we read the committee meeting minutes of your meetings. It's something we usually do at the end of the year because we take it all the way through the date of our audit, not just June 30, which is what our report will be dated. We'll probably issue our audit sometime in December, mid-December. So we'll read your committee meeting minutes through that date. So we do look at those. One thing that I'll talk about when we come back to go over the final report is 99.9% of the time, people will get a clean opinion on their financial statements for their bond fund. I've only written one finding for noncompliance for bond. It's very, very rare that you might have a noncompliance finding. However, what I will talk about is whether or not we had any audit adjustments as part of getting that clean opinion. So what happens is when we come in to do the audit, management presents us with their unaudited financial statements. We go through and do our procedures. If we find things that we think need to be corrected, we'll present management with audit adjustments. They can accept them or not accept them. If they accept them, we can move forward with that clean opinion because the financial statements with our audit adjustments will be fairly stated. But I'll always point out whether or not we had any audit adjustments, and if we did not, it's a good indication that the financial information that management prepares for you throughout the year is accurate because we didn't have to come in and change anything to make it in accordance with the accounting standards. So that's something I'll always point out when we come back with that final report.
So the meeting reports that we're getting, you will look at post facto?
Yes.
See that they've been. So it might be worthwhile for us to have you, I would be interested in seeing how those compare with our, with what other boards similar to ours are getting. And just, whether it's about the same level of detail that everybody else gets. And I know you know that already, but it would be interesting. I think people on the committee would say, is this the sort of format report? We've had questions about timing of things. We have planning expenses and people are looking at percentages. It looks like we have a soft cost rate of 60% of this budget, blah, 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 but is explained to us. This is a forward planning effort. This work's not going on. We don't know what the numbers are yet. And so we have had a number of discussions about the numbers and I think we are understanding more with each meeting about those, but I think to a certain extent, we're wondering whether I think this is very similar to what happened under the last Measure P funding, but if you have a chance to look at those, I think it would be worthwhile to say, yes, this is about the level that we should be getting, and there's not some better way to format the numbers. I'm not sure they have any numbers that they can format, but we're still, at least I am, I can't speak for everybody on the committee, sometimes it's struggle. How do we interpret that number when this looks like soft cost, this looks like hard cost, but the actual hard cost is what we see, plus something over here that's indeterminate, so it can't be listed. And so we're working to try and do a good job of looking at what we have. And then with regard to the annual report, what is our deadline for that?
It's sometime February, March of the subsequent year.
Okay, and so that way then we would have your report in December.
Probably mid-December, yeah.
Okay.
The state deadline is December 31st.
And so then the report, then the drafting is the staff drafts that report for our approval or what, for our annual report. And I think it's very important in terms of our community. We have a lot of people who are going to feel the burdens of the taxes that they're paying on this, and they're going to be, we don't want them to be very unhappy about it, but younger people who are buying houses who aren't under Prop 13 and all that are going to really feel some of these things. That we have our Pasadena Unified School District is looking at a $3 billion bond issue, plus we're looking at several $100 million from the city to fix the library and some other things. And when these come in, some of these have been divided and cosmetized with parcel taxes, and then ad valorem kinds of fees based on property values. And when they come out and say this is only going to cost you 5 cents or something like that, or $1, that's per $100 or per dollar, whatever. And so it comes out, and we have had people who have come in who say they have been misled by the campaigns. There's not anything we can do about anything that's happened in the past, but we have a lot of things going on in the future. And it would be nice if this will come after some of these bond issues go on the ballot in November, but I think it's very important for us to be able to communicate clearly about the appropriateness of the spending relative to the bond issue. I mean, they said this committee's political, so we're not able to do much. The trustees make all the decisions, and even the bond language, most people who vote for it don't know really what it said. And if you look carefully at things like purchasing land for a new campus somewhere, that's all in there. But that certainly is not necessarily things that were at the top of consciousness for everybody. So I think it's important with our constituents for them to really understand PCC normally uses its money very responsibly and very well for the benefit of the community. But we need to really, I think, take our responsibilities as seriously as we can and have that, because that annual report's the only thing we have that's a work product in this committee, essentially, unless we object to something or you find something and tell us the trustees have done a bad thing, which I don't think that's going to happen. You said 99% are clean in the audit. So the question is, we want to take our responsibilities seriously and do that in the report. So any help that you can give us on that, I think we would all appreciate.
Can I comment on one thing before there's
Yeah,
any question on Dr. Opels? So we can pull CBOC reports. I mean, they're all public, so like we can go to Mount Sax and pull an example of a CBOC report. We can pull Santa Monica's just so you can see what they are. But you all get to sort of, if you want to see something else, you just need to express that to the district. We based it on what we provided for Measure P. And so if there's something additional that we want at that point, but we can also provide to the committee examples of other colleges' CBOC reports.
Right.
I think that'd be helpful because we don't know what we're missing. That's
Sure.
part of it.
I think we can do that. We'll do that in our next
Or-
meeting and
or
make sure that we have options, or different examples.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me? Okay. Yeah. I'm glad Candace brought it. I was just spending 10 minutes looking into, I look at these firms' reputations, legal actions, very good. That is nothing really from a community college side. I guess have like cases last 10 years or so. I did see that on the Mount SAC reports, the scope you guys have is clearly laid out. I have just a clarifying question, kind of to Dr. Opo's point about 99% of a very, like, I'm probably more curious than like want to question about it, but the area that I'm concerned about, which I have here, a few people have come to this committee and expressed their concerns about it, is on the performance audit side of things, specifically about the bond fund has been made in accordance with state requirement and with voter-approved ballot language. For example, Candace or whatever make various claims saying this is, ballot language. So from an auditor perspective, how do you match this, what we spending the money? I mean, is it subjective just based on you guys' opinion, or do you guys have any professional guidelines or whatever and say that this is funding, this is the voter language, this is appropriate, this is not appropriate? Is that what your report will generate based on the scope that I'm seeing here?
Sure, yeah, so we will read through the ballot language. If there's any other kind of documents that the district put out with the bond, we can usually look at those too, but the ballot language is what we're required to look at by law. And then, again, the determination of compliance is actually objective, so we can't review any kind of subjective requirements that would make us not independent. But if we have gray areas, and we have had some gray areas with clients in the past where, maybe management's taken a stance and we don't necessarily agree with that stance, it's really a legal determination. So
that's my question. Like when you say objective, what do you mean by, like, what are you based on to make your questioning about it?
We'll look at the individual item in question. So we'll look at the underlying cost. What is it for? What kind of work was performed? What specific project was it for? If we have to, sometimes we have contacted vendors when we don't have enough support that they've given us through their invoicing process, or their contract is missing something that we need. And then the next step is we would ask the bond counsel, as well as have our attorneys look at it and say, okay, based on the language in the law, this is where we're at. It happens every once in a while, like I said, when we have those gray areas, and a lot of times what will happen is most of our districts are great. They want to be in compliance. They don't want to get into trouble and have to pay back bond money, right? Because that comes out of the general fund. So a lot of times when we do have these gray areas, our clients will ask us in advance, hey, what do you think about this? Do you see this being a problem? Have we seen this somewhere else? That's another thing is, we'll go back to the experience and say, have we seen this at another college where they did something similar and it was disallowed or allowed, or what have you. So we try and get ahead of it so we can make sure it gets done right the first time, and provide that guidance back to the district. But that's kind of what we would do if we ran into a gray area.
And just to clarify, because you use the word your client, we consider your client, or PCC is considered as your client? Like, who is your client in this case?
We report to the Board of Trustees. So under our audit standards, we have to report to the governing body of an organization, and that would be the Board of Trustees, because they have the ultimate decision-making authority.
Okay.
So I have some big picture questions and some small picture questions. I'll start with bigger ones. So my view of our role is our principal role is to make it even more. And we have an obligation to meet and ask questions, but those are all essentially geared toward that we have to make to the voters to tell them that money's been spent properly. And the only thing that we're, the statute is not very clear about projects. But it does appear that we are entitled to rely upon your opinion. So to me, and I believe we're also entitled to rely on what staff tells us, but we're not. It's not that clear. We're supposed to ask questions of staff. which suggests we're supposed to maybe be a little suspicious, but we're supposed to essentially just rely on your opinion, which is good. I mean, it's good for us to rely upon something that we don't have the ability to do ourselves, to understand. I mean, I've looked at the Yellow Book, it's 270 pages, and I probably couldn't get 3 pages into it and not get confused. So, to me, your audit letter, is really important. It's an opinion of sort. I'm familiar with opinions. I served on an opinion committee of 2 major international law firms, hundreds and hundreds of opinions. And they are all different and negotiable and on the same side. And they mean things. Every word means something. And every qualification and reservation and limitation means something. So my concern is not so much, I like your qualifications, they appear to be more than sufficient. My concern is going to be the form of opinion. That's why I ask questions that I think led to this, perhaps it's, which is, we were given a sample of your letters from 2021. And I looked at them and they look confusing, honestly. 3 letters. I don't know whether it's supposed to be 3 letters, but it will not. So I'm concerned, and I wasn't entirely clear what everything said, which is not surprising. I think most of us would probably not be entirely clear on what it's actually said. But my concern is that if you don't give a clean opinion, means unqualified, typical opinion is 1 sentence. Everything is great, but that's not the way opinions read. It's like 5 pages long. You really only did this, and you did it this way, and you're disclosing it so that we're aware that it wasn't really, you didn't test every voice, you tested some voices, and so but it goes back to my concern, which is that if you, whatever limitation you put, we have to put in our annual report that we relied upon. I don't know. We relied upon your opinion, but your opinion was qualified in as many ways as it's qualified, and that's what we have to tell the public is that, something like that. So I want, for me it's helpful because I don't want to get your opinion and then be confused right away. Rather, so one of the things I did is I looked at the law and I made notes about what your opinion is supposed to say and what form it's supposed to be. And I'm happy to share those notes with you. And you can tell me, I misunderstand something, and that's fine. And so I'm not saying I'm going to give you notes and it's got to be like this, or not going to be happy. But you could see it, and then when you come back, you can explain, we can't do that. And I know, maybe that state law puts you in a difficult position, this idea that you have to tell us that every expense is within the bond. When we all know we can't tell what's in the bond or not. It just looks like maybe everything's in the bond. Maybe that will end up being your position. Everything's in the bond. And maybe that's why the bond was written that way, right? So
the one thing I would say, in addition, and certainly we'll let our partners here respond to that, I would say we're not the only CBOC. So there are tons of CBOCs who have to rely on opinion. So one additional recommendation to Dr. Opels would be we can pull the natural CBOC expense reports that CBOCs receive. We can share also what they produce. So if you want to see an example, we can pull what the CBOC for Measure P had to produce. But it's important into the context of if you're confused about how the opinions are used in those annual reports or how they're referenced in those reports, those would be great examples of seeing how the Santa Monica CBOC or the Mount Sac CBOC uses the opinion letters and how they reference them, you know, to say, well, here's what we received, here's how it did, and here's what our perspective is related to that, as opposed to completely, I mean, I'm not opposed to sort of giving your notes, but I think it's really important for you to match what other hundreds of CBOCs across the state of California. We could just stay with our local areas. So I have Santa Monica, Mount Sac, and Citrus, who produce these reports every month, who receive the same information that you all receive in this body every time that they meet, and then see actually what gets produced out of it.
I would be interested in seeing the audit letters that are delivered, because
I'm sure they're referenced within those reports.
well,
So we'll pull that and provide that for you.
yeah, I hear you. I mean, there's also something called California Association of Bond Oversight Committees, and
Sure.
they're very critical of the audit reports that are delivered to.
All areas have their agendas and how they're
I
funded.
totally
And
understand,
those are-
but
So I'm just saying, our peers for community colleges are around us. We have nothing, like, we don't affect the Mount Sac one, we don't affect the Citrus one, we don't, Glendale. I think we would naturally want to look at our peers within the same sector to kind of at least give you all some clarity about what other CBOCs are providing to their constituents from a community college standpoint.
Yeah,
That
so
would
that
be
would be
correct.
interesting. You know, we'll have still one people.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, you're one of
Right.
14 people here.
Because there is this group that is very critical of.
Because usually in a political situation, there's like
But
both
if you'd like,
sides.
I don't have to respond to everything.
I'm just
Just saying.
Alan, I mean,
Yes.
the goal today
So-
was to like,
Right, so I'd like, can I?
sure.
Okay. So, you know, my concern is I would like your opinion to be as good as possible. And that's what every client would like from auditor or from an attorney, is to have it be as clean as possible. And so I don't know exactly what that means, but I can tell you, you know, like I looked, and there's something called Guide for Annual Audits of K through 12 Local Education Agencies and State Compliance Report, with an Appendix A, which says how a report is supposed to be formatted for a Procter & Bond. And you know, the formatting of the audit letters that I saw is not consistent with that. Now, maybe that's because that your audit letters were from 2021 and this is the 2023 edition.
Yeah, so actually our opinions luckily changed in 2022, I believe.
Yeah.
So crazy timing there, but the goal of changing the opinions is they move them around to hopefully make them a little bit easier to read.
Perfect.
But our audit opinions are pretty much standardized. So unlike legal opinions where we would list out, you know, these are our thoughts and reasonings, our audit opinions are not like that. They are pretty much standard reports. There's a couple things sometimes we highlight, very, very large things, like if we had a new accounting standard or something like that, we bring those to the reader's attention. But other than that, the rest of the language is boilerplate. But now the opinion reads, our opinion is pretty much the financials are fairly stated or they're not fairly stated, and that's the first couple lines of the opinion. So they've been rearranged. In addition to that, the performance standards that we have to do the compliance audits also changed last year. So the reports look a lot different than they did maybe 2-3 years ago because the standards have been updated.
So that may be why I was confused from the
Yeah.
2021.
I can also too, I mean, again, these are all available online. I can provide a bond audit that we did maybe last year. That would be the most current. And maybe I can give you one from one of our peer firms for another local college that we don't audit, so you can kind of see
Sure.
one that's not ours as well.
Okay. So I think, you know, I mean, I have quick up. One of the things in my notes that I wanted to share with you, I'm happy to share with everybody else, is, that the letter should be addressed to the committee and its members, and there should be a reliance paragraph. If that's not in the form, I assume it's optional, because that's something, at least from all firms, it's always an optional thing. So the ask should be done a lot. Because we're supposed to be able to. So you don't have to answer right now, if you're not sure, but those are the sort of things that I'm thinking of, the things that would protect us when we go to the public, because this is our one big duty, is to go to the public and tell them that we have asked all the questions and that we relied on, and we have concluded that the money was spent properly, was spent for and I don't have anything right now that tells me it wasn't. I'm not skeptical. But I also, want to be able to rely on your audit
Sure.
and have it be clean so that I don't say to myself, well, why did they carve out this, or why did they say this differently than the form that I see in this guide.
Sure. So maybe what I will make a note of is when we come back to go over the audit report, I'll go through the opinion in a lot more detail than I normally do. But do remember we provide reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, that everything is in compliance, because we are sample based. We don't come in and audit 100%. And so we rely on our sample to come to a conclusion about whether or not there's any material non-compliance or material misstatements for the financial statements. That's what's required under law.
Yeah, I don't really expect you to do anything that you shouldn't do. I just want to be aware that if you have to qualify, it's just your professional standards require you to qualify your opinion.
Sure.
And maybe we have to rule that. I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
if
I
one of
can
these
tell you what that would
influences-
look like. So I had the pleasure of writing the finding a couple years ago for a bond audit that I did. And so not only is it stated in our opinion, hey, we had a problem, but we also include a detailed finding in our report. So unlike for-profit entities, governmental agencies have to have all of their internal control and compliance findings included in the report itself. So if we were to find something that we deem not compliant, we would have detail of this is how much we found, this is kind of the impact on the total population, this is how much we looked at. So you'll get a lot of context in terms of if we do find non-compliance. It will be written in the report.
And I'm not talking about non-compliance. I'm talking about standard, what you would probably consider standard qualifications. Like here, in 2021, it's multiple pages. It says what you've done and not done, and but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the district's construction fund internal control. What does that mean? And I thought you're supposed to be applying. I look at something else. You're supposed to be applying internal control, but maybe I misunderstand. So if you're, and I assume this is boilerplate, but this is something you always include, and that you still include.
Yeah, we do.
Right.
Again, I can go over all of that in detail when we issue our opinion. I can go over what all of that means and what the different elements of the opinion relate to the audit.
If you can't change that, then we can't really tell the public that, because we don't. If you can't figure out the effectiveness of their internal controls, then we certainly can't. So that's an example
Okay.
of my concern.
And I can say that that's not a requirement of the state audits for the district as a whole or for the Prop 39 bonds. We're not required to test the operating effectiveness of internal control like a publicly traded company would have. Those are above and beyond, and those are governed by the SEC. We're required to review controls and let you know if we find any problems.
Okay. Yeah, and then I was looking at that Appendix A, and it seemed to say that independent auditors report on internal control. This this report specifies material instances of non-compliance. This is supposedly the.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. We do issue that, and we will let the district, the committee, and the board know if we find instances of internal control deficiencies. But that's what our yellow book opinion is. That's what we're required to issue in our government auditing standards. But it actually does not require us to issue an opinion on the operating effectiveness of control, which is a significant amount of testing above and beyond what any governmental agency receives.
Okay. All right.
It's
So
a
I'm just
little
giving you a
confusing,
flavor.
yeah.
I don't claim to understand it all, and I'm sure you do. Those are the things that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
It's not a clean opinion because it's going to carve out things, and that may be perfectly standard. Everybody does that. Just trying to understand.
Do you guys have reporting standards that you guys have written? Like how you guys make your reporting? Like is that written somewhere that you can
Yes.
put more for clarity?
Yeah, we abide by the AICPA auditing standards. Those are available publicly online to anybody interested in reading them. As addition to those yellow book ones, those are published by the federal government. Usually it's updated every once or twice a year.
For staff, is it possible just to send that out to the board? I think that would just be easier. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I just have some little questions now. What is the period of time? So we're going to get something in December, mid-December, so we would expect. So we're supposed to publish by March, and then we get the audit report from you mid-December. We have till March 15th to provide our report to the public. Seems like ample time, I guess, for you to explain, because it's gonna be signed, and you're gonna tell us it's set in stone.
And we'll probably know the preliminary results October, November-ish, so we can always say, we're planning on issuing a modified clean audit, and management can certainly share that with the committee, but we won't finalize it until about December. And so in terms of, is that enough time for inclusion in your annual report? The audit section is actually typically a smaller portion of the audit or the annual report. There's a lot of information about the projects going on, and then a reference to our audit report, and that you guys have reviewed it, received it, and what the results were. And then our audit report is not just only included in your annual report, it's also publicly posted online, so anybody can go and access it once it's finalized.
All right, well, we'll see all this when we see it. So the period of time covered by your audit report and covered by our annual report is what?
Our audit will be July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2024, so it's an annual based on the district's fiscal year.
So we're giving our report 8 months after the conclusion of the fiscal year, which is what's statute guidelines. So I have a very picky question. Why didn't you issue us an audit report for the period prior to July 1, 2023, so we could do an annual report
This coming year.
March of 2024?
Sure. The audit requirement is triggered by the issuance of the debt. So even if you pass the measure, the audit requirement doesn't kick in until you actually get the bond monies, once you sell the bonds, which didn't happen until after July 1.
18th of
Yeah.
2023.
Okay, so bonds weren't issued till after
Yeah.
the beginning of the fiscal year?
Yeah, once you get the cash,
Okay,
that's
that's
when we
what-
start auditing.
Yeah.
Okay, because I know bonds were authorized in December, we were created in March.
Correct.
So
So
I'm
we
worried
sold
that
our
we're-
first
we're already
issuance, that
missing.
first
Oh, yeah.
130 on July 17th. And then the district received those funds, I think, August 2nd, 3rd.
Okay. And so I didn't see that anywhere. You're confident with that? I mean,
Yeah.
We
that-
sold
that
the
makes it
bonds
the
when we
first
sold
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
but I mean that you're not supposed to issue a report
Yeah.
until the bonds have been sold.
The state has said, because basically we would come in and issue a report that says there's nothing here, we give you a clean opinion for zero. So the state, to reduce the cost of having to provide an audit of no expenditures, has said until you issue the cash, you don't need the audit.
Okay. I mean, I totally agree. It'd be a waste of time, and yet the statute does say you're supposed to issue it every year. The annual report is supposed to be every year. When, it doesn't say. But we were created, so I was worried. But you agree that the report issued until July? I don't remember that. So, but that's perfectly natural.
I think when the bonds was issued, like in
We
July, I
issued the
think.
bond, we sold the bonds on July 17th, and we received the bond funds on this, or I think the county signed off on it on August 2nd.
Yeah.
Okay, so the state tells you you don't have to do an audit, a report. That's-
It may not be anything to audit, I think, until the bond was issued, right?
Yeah, but if the idea is you're supposed to tell the public, you still tell the public. No, yeah, there's, nothing's been done wrong with your money, because it hasn't even been sold yet. But if you're not required to issue the audit report, that doesn't require to issue. Okay, so that was my one question.
Okay, other comments or questions?
So I do
Oh,
want
no, go ahead.
to, I'll hand out to the extent anybody wants it, but I want you to have it in particular. My thoughts, again, these are just my thoughts. They're not, I am happy to be educated in why this can't be done. But this would be my version of a clean opinion, the unqualified, opinion bad.
You mentioned that there's one non-compliance finding throughout the entire cooperation of the other CBOCs, right?
There's one that I've done personally. We may have others out there in the firm, but one that I've done in recent years that I can attest to.
Yeah, I'm sure that you guys won't do anything wrong, but then is it possible to find information on that one non-compliance finding so I can be sure to look what to look out for?
I can tell you a little bit more
Okay.
about it. It was related to payroll costs. They had administrative payroll in the bond because this district was under financial duress in the general fund, and so there was some questionable payroll costs that we determined to be not compliant. We wrote a finding over that. If we do have issues in the bond, a lot of times it's with payroll, which is why many districts elect not to charge any payroll, and the ones that do are very, very careful over what goes into the bond fund. So that's what our finding was about.
What was the most difficult part about conducting a performance audit?
We looked at a lot. The sample sizes are very large, and there's a lot of backup to get through because it's construction related. The invoices and the contracts are very, very lengthy. So it is a time consuming endeavor.
When you have issues with expenses, do they get worked out where things, maybe money is moved around before you issue your report, or do you not allow that? Like you do your audit, if it's not right, you don't allow
Yeah.
them to fix it, and
So-
then you issue your
Yeah,
report.
so we've already started the audit, actually. We did some preliminary procedures in March, April-ish. So we've already started looking at expenses through that time period. If it's before closing, a lot of times districts will move things around, and such is the nature of construction. Sometimes things are funded partially bond, partially state. There can be moving parts. What will happen is we'll come back at the end of the year and review that. So if there was something questionable that got moved out, great. If not, then you'll see finding in our audit report.
So, from your perspective, if it's fixed, it's, if there's something questionable and it's been addressed, you don't report it, it's been addressed.
Depends on the nature of the situation. If I feel that there was a true deficiency there, an issue that needs to be addressed and needs to be brought to the board's attention and the committee's attention, we would probably still write a control finding for it, an issue with internal control that we would report to everybody, even if in the end it did get fixed. It could lead to problems in the future. So really depends on the nature of the problem, but if we think that it's an issue with internal controls, we would certainly write a finding for that.
Okay, that's not.
I just have one short question, kind of follow up to my earlier question, but I just want to make sure I hear right about it. Thank you for coming in first of all and answering a lot of our questions.
No problem.
Just clarifying, and I will make a bunch of notes. It's good, but were you saying that for the purpose of this audit that you're doing for us, the client is PCC Board of Trustees?
That's who we report to under our professional standards, is the governing
So the
body.
report will be based on what they concern us to see. That's what you mentioned earlier, right? You gear towards what the clients
No, so our audits are based on our professional standards, so
Right.
we wouldn't change something in our audit report because, you know, the management or the board didn't like it, that's how we remain independent.
Okay.
Yeah. Our report will be addressed to both the district and the oversight committee.
Others?
Just a few follow-ups, no particular order of preference. Do we see a draft or advanced version of the report and then a final report, or we see the final report and that's it?
That's really up to the committee and management. I'm happy to provide a draft in draft form. Some committees, I just take the final. It really just depends. What's really critical though is that we get it to the state on time. We got to get it to the state by December 31st, and a lot of times the college is closed for the holidays, so that is our main goal, is to make sure that the district stays in compliance with getting the reports turned in on time. But if the committee, if it works out with the schedule and we can get you a draft, we're happy to do that. It's really based on preference.
I'm a lawyer, so it's just my training to always look at things in
Look at
advance.
things before they're
and
final.
provide input confidence. If that's acceptable to everyone, that might be a good way to go. The assigned audit team. So, Alicia, you're our relationship contact member manager, and Anna's the team lead. Is that a fair? So you're.
She'll handle the day-to-day, working with the district, making sure that the audit gets done, but I'm the one that will sign the report.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how many others would be on your team would be involved in this process?
Typically, it's about a team of 4 or 5 individuals that we'll come out with, and that's who will work on the actual audit procedures.
Okay. And what range of experience do they typically have?
So it can be a wide variety. Typically, we do have a senior on the engagement as well, so the senior is more experienced, and they'll kind of oversee any of the newer staff. All of our staff, though, they do get all of the adequate training before we send them out to the field, so they're pretty familiar with all the procedures that need to be performed, but typically we will have a senior that will oversee the day-to-day, and then I'm involved in all of the day-to-day, so I also will provide that level of assurance.
Okay. Great. I think I know the answer, but I'm just going to ask anyway. The report we're getting it's a compliance report saying that the expenses are consistent with the requirements of the state and the bond, but it doesn't go to the next level saying, oh, we think in terms of efficiencies, or these fees seem high, or here's where you can save money, or that kind. That's not part of this kind of an audit, right?
No, that's not part of this audit. If we saw something that we thought was egregious based on our working in the industry and kind of knowing, hey, this is how much it costs to build a building, and we see something that we think is just not in the ballpark, that's certainly something we would voice a concern about. But in terms of efficiencies or things like that with the construction, our main objective is to determine whether or not it meets the ballot language.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Right. Okay, thank you. I think, I have one last question. When the bond council writes the language, I assume that within the bounds set by law, they write the language to be, allow about as much discretion as possible by the trustees subsequently. It doesn't really meant to build any extra fences around it. They put in probably what's required by law, but otherwise, if you look at the language in the detail, it would seem to include almost any kind of expenditure that relates to physical facilities and the costs related to that. And it looks like they have picked words and phrasing for the lawyers here that allows almost anything. Is that a fair characterization, do you think? Or are there some extra bounds where the trustees have asked bond counsel to tuck it in and build a fence a little closer so that their actions are limited to some scope? I mean, in other words, within the state law, could you make the wording of this bond issue any broader than it is?
That's probably more of a question for management. I did read your ballot language recently. It is a little bit more restrictive, I think, than some of your neighboring schools. Most of them have even wider and broader arrays. where it just generally opens it up to construction and remodeling. I don't think your language is actually quite as broad as some of your neighboring districts.
Okay.
I think the answer is the statute says it's supposed to be a specified list, but the districts have over time gone way beyond that, and there aren't enough lawyers out there to say that's not right, because the appropriate remedy for that, as I understand it, would be for somebody to challenge the bond issue as not being compliant with Prop 39, but it wasn't, and they aren't.
Yeah, that was my concerns on audits. I'm not sure if it's gonna come out or not in that concept. Some of those things, subjective, objective, I'm not sure.
Right.
It gets into the gray area.
Yeah, and that's just my impression, so that's not
Yeah.
even an opinion of my own. That's my impression of how it's developed over time.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're ending with the quorum, but we do have
I
kind
have
of
one more question.
Yeah,
Does for staff, going through the measure, do we have counsel that walks you guys through the process with everything that you guys
The
do?
bond
Or
counsel-
is it-
Correct. They're the ones who drafted the language. Then they presented the bond council, as well as a team of other financial advisors helped to present that to the Board of Trustees in open meetings, so that the questions from the trustees could go directly to bond council. If there was an issue that, like, I don't know, if there was a legal issue related to something, they would manage those conversations in closed session. So yes, they are.
That you guys are closely working with?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
thank you.
So let's go to item C1, proposed future agenda items. And I do think that I heard possibly 3 items here, to add to our fall agenda. We had some that we added in our last regular meeting, or our regular meeting. We did have questions here that Brandon talked something about, but Lawrence was also there, which have to do with audit standards and procedures, did we not? Do you want anything on our next agenda where the committee discusses that? We have a number of people who weren't here today, and we could put some of these things on here. Do you have comments that you would like to discuss in the community on the audit standards and procedures?
I don't have anything specific, but I don't think it's a bad idea, on the agenda.
Okay, so that's a possibility. And then the second thing that we did,
Well, for me, before you move on from that, for me, I was just asking that the standards we shared
Right.
with the group, I don't think it necessarily needs to have a conversation about the standards. I was just saying
well,
that.
let's consider that, but we're gonna have the standards and procedures.
We could send out the reporting standards. The question is, if you're going to have it as an agenda item, who do you expect to answer those questions?
Well,
So we're
I
happy to
think it-
provide the
Yeah,
standards
I
document.
think at this point, that if they're sent out, you'll be our resource for now.
If you have questions, then we can send that back to I'm just reflecting on the next agenda. So
Yeah.
the way that I read this was I will provide, the district will provide examples of CBOC, and we can send those.
Well, let's go ahead just a second here, then we can discuss it a little further. The second one that I heard, that Alan was talking a lot about was annual report formats. And the best I could get it was compliance assurance limitations. And you gave us a paper here, and would you care to discuss that at the next meeting? Because you talked about that today, because this would be the formats of the reports that we might come up with. Then you were talking a lot about the limitations in the assurances that we get regarding compliance, right? Compliance assurance limitations.
Yeah, I'm not sure that, again, I would like to see the examples, so maybe the same thing. If we can get
A more current audit report, yeah.
well, there's a audit report and a form of it, our annual
Oh,
Yeah,
report
that we can get from others.
that
Yep.
is more current. Like, I wouldn't want to get a 2021.
No,
That'd be
we'll
not-
pull like whatever, like Citrus just Their bond issuance, I think, was last year. They might have one that was last year, but Santa Monica, Mount Sac, their CBOCs are issuing annual reports every year. So my plan was just to pull their last annual reports and provide that to you all as
Yeah, I think
examples.
that'd be great.
Okay.
And if you could do it now as opposed
Yeah.
to in March next year, when
Yeah.
you know, so we
Yep.
can start thinking,
Seeing
oh, this
what
is
you
what
wanna
we're supposed to
produce.
do.
But do you not want to discuss that at the next meeting?
You know, we need
I
to.
mean, if we're gonna talk, if we're gonna get, you know, I think if we send it out, the question is,
Yeah, should we talk about
or
it?
should we not talk about it? And if we're gonna talk about the audit, we're gonna send out something on the audit standards, are we not gonna talk about those? And then the third one that I heard was, that a couple of you brought up, including Brandon, what is the timetable for preparation? And the question within that, when do we get a draft version or not? What do we want? And so if we're moving toward this, it seemed to me that we had the three questions there. We're gonna get materials on the standards and procedures. We're gonna get materials on the report format and what they say and the compliance assurance limitations. And then we're gonna talk about what the schedule is that we hear, and it would be, it would seem to me if we're going to have information on all that, it can just go out and everybody can get it and we won't talk about it. But if we don't put it on the agenda, we have no opportunity to discuss it.
I guess if you go as a discussion item, the timing may be a report, because you might tell us more about timing or.
I think we also have to consider the past and future agenda items that we asked in our last meeting. And so those are things that we have to discuss as well. But I mean, there's two things that was happening today that I don't necessarily think has to be on the agenda. Maybe we get them ahead of time, and if we have questions, we can forward those questions to staff, and then maybe they can write something as part of it. But I don't think it has to come back to the meeting per se at our next meeting.
I think technically the only things that have to be on the agenda are things that you're going to vote on, you know, business items. And so if it's a discussion item, you know,
You still have to have it on here.
It has to be on
Right,
there.
if it's discussion, right.
Yeah.
How about something, so one, I think we talked about providing the engagement letter, does that sound right? So what about some sort of a catch-all discussion item, audit protocols, audit procedures, audit standards, audit, I don't know, some catch-all that will,
Okay, so what, maybe we just put a single item on there,
the audit.
yeah.
Why did we make a discussion?
Why don't we put on annual report, and then that
Yeah.
covers everything.
Sure.
Within it, okay? And that would include the formatting, the compliance assurances, that would include the schedule, so you think that's broad enough, Candace? We do that?
Sure, I mean, we can provide, I want to make sure that if the staff need to be prepared, I don't know what you want us to do.
Well, I think
What's annual
actually
report?
you.
So is it just you all having a conversation?
If you talk, on a couple of things here, you had a couple of people that had specific things they wanted. We don't want too much because then not everybody will read it, so we want it to be as economical as possible. And since Alan has spent so much time and he's already given us a little brief here, why don't you at least work with Alan and any others who want to join in to help figure out what you need to send out, what you don't need. And I would be happy to work with you on that too. Okay? Because we don't should have sent out a bunch of stuff that nobody's going to look at.
The challenge is you guys are a committee and there isn't like a one-on, like I can't, right? So
No, I
while I
understand that.
appreciate that I can we've got the letter piece, we can respond to that, but it really needs to go back to everybody.
Yeah,
Whether they
Oh,
agree
yeah,
or not.
yes, I
Okay.
understand. That's what I'm saying.
And my piece was basically because of Alan's standards that he found or looked up, to have their standards
Then we see
actually,
that,
so that
yeah.
so that everybody can balance between the two.
Yeah.
So I mean, it works for me.
I think if you provide the materials, that's probably all you
Yeah.
do.
Agreed. Okay, thank you.
I do have a question though regarding that. So our next meeting is in September, and then after that, when is our next meeting?
We
You
didn't
guys
set it.
usually decide.
So, okay. So,
I was thinking about that same thing, Brandon. I was
Right.
kind of wondering about that too.
because I mean, if our meeting I mean, I don't want to rush this, but if the audit is coming back in December, then I would guess we will want to meet probably before the actually comes. or
Yeah, I
something
know
like that.
that's where you're going. I kind of wonder in my head too, because you're gonna publish in the state on December 31st, so I don't think there's a chance that we can meet during that period.
Unless, I mean, I know that you guys said that there were going to be like a draft audit before the actual, that you guys can give us a draft audit before the actual audit is posted, or something like that, right? And so thinking that it comes in November or something like that, that draft comes in November or something, is it possible for us to start thinking about if we can actually meet like that first week of December or something like that to actually look at that draft audit, or even, like, that's how I think about it before it's actually submitted.
What's the end point, and then work
Right.
yourself backwards. I think in our annual, what did you call it?
Annual
Joe?
report.
Annual report update, I think at our next meeting, we talk about this, and
Yeah.
we calendar both the draft one and the final review, which usually, even similarly, what we have to do for our board of trustees, we kind of back up to that,
Mhm.
whatever their December board meeting is, and then we work back to get the draft pieces. So
Okay.
we could do that at the September meeting.
Well, that's depending on when you will have the draft ready,
Mhm.
so if we can find out before September's meeting,
Mhm.
if that is even possible, then we can talk about the timeline.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just have a question about the timeline. So I'm assuming that it'll get presented to the Board of Trustees in December,
Mhm.
and then from there, then we would review that afterwards, correct? And then give our report
It'll come to both of you guys.
at the same time?
No,
So we would have to have a
we'll-
meeting in
yeah.
December then?
It'll come to you all and the board of trustees.
Okay. So we have to give our findings at the same time as the board
You
or
guys
after?
get to publish your annual report after.
Right, that's in March, that's why I want to make sure. So yes, so they would get it, we do it at the same time, but our
You
actual
get to
take
form
place
your own,
afterwards.
yep, form your
Okay.
own opinion and annual report after that.
So we don't necessarily have to have a meeting in December, because I know a lot of people are going to be gone and out of town, and it's going to be very hard.
We do need y'all to have a meeting because you need to
Yeah.
accept.
Except that,
The
so when
report.
will the board get it, so we can try to start planning on communications and everything else like that?
Yeah, so it's normally at their December board meeting, which should be the second Wednesday of the month in December.
But
So I
hopefully
think
we'll
they-
have a draft before that.
But that's when they normally accept. Both the district's financial audit, and then now our first measure PCC audit. But we'll
Hey.
send those dates out.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Anna. We've covered everything on the agenda, and unless any of you have a parting shot, I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you, Candace. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Candace,
Thanks very much.
set it up one.